Hi, everybody. My name is Katie. I'm the marketing manager at Wattpad Studios. I'm really happy to be here, so thank you, Trini, for inviting me, and I'm so happy to be in Buenos Aires. I love this city so much. It's so beautiful. So I'm here today to talk about Wattpad. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Wattpad, so I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction to what the platform is, and then I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about our new publishing division that we just launched in January of this year. So Wattpad is an app that you can see on your mobile phones, and it started in 2006 as a way for people to read stories like Pride and Prejudice and Jane Eyre, so those really classical stories where the copyright was no longer applicable. And it actually started on the Motorola Razr, which was the flip phone back in the early 2000s. So it was kind of great that the smartphone came right after Wattpad started, because that really opened the door for an entire new storytelling experience. So fast forward to 2019, Wattpad is now a thriving writing community of over 70 million monthly active users, and we have over 565 million stories that people have uploaded to the platform. All of these stories are in a variety of different genres, so we have easily over 1,000 genres of stories that are on the platform, just because we don't limit the types of stories that people can contribute to Wattpad. So you'll find all sorts of genres, from very specific types of romance to sci-fi to fantasy. So what we really are focused on is getting these great stories into the hands of people that come to our platform to find great stories. So Wattpadders, which is what we call people in our community, they spend about 37 minutes every day using Wattpad. And this is pretty incredible when you think about things, apps I should say, like Instagram or Facebook, where you're constantly scrolling when you're on it, but it's more of a passive consumption where you're just kind of going through it and you're looking at the pictures, but you're not really taking in or consuming any of the content. With Wattpad, people are actually reading the stories, so they're fully consumed in what they're taking in, and so we can see that they're spending about 37 minutes every day using the platform, which is pretty incredible. And like I was saying earlier, we have over 70 million monthly users. We have about 520,000 stories that are being uploaded to the platform every day. We have around 1.6 million writers on Wattpad, and these are writers from anywhere between any age, and also people that write as a hobby, but also people that want to make a career out of their writing. So we have a really diverse group of people who are writing on the platform as well. And we're available in virtually every country, and we are also available in over 50 languages. So in Argentina, we have about 1.4 million people on Wattpad, and that's a variety of writers and readers. And Argentina is actually the second most popular Spanish-speaking country in terms of readership, and the 13th highest readership in the entire world. So there are a lot of really engaged Argentinian Wattpadders, it's safe to say that. And the other cool thing about Wattpad is that we're reaching a demographic that is historically very difficult to reach. So we are targeting mostly Gen Z and millennial, which are the under 35 crowd. And this crowd is notorious for having a very short attention span. But you can see from our numbers, the 37 minutes a day that I said earlier, that this is a community that we really have their attention, and they really are focused on reading, and they're book enthusiasts, and they love consuming original content. So this is just a screenshot of what a Wattpad story page looks like. So you can kind of see we're optimized for mobile consumption. We target stories and we personalize content based on what people are reading, because Wattpad is a tech company, so we do use data to tailor user experience so that it really is giving them the best experience possible. And we also use something called machine learning and story DNA, which I'll go into in a little bit, And that's really how we do a lot of the deep diving to understand what our audience is looking for in terms of what they're interested in reading. And we also have a really interesting way that we engage with our users, and an interesting way that writers engage with the users or their fans. So in every story, we have the option of commenting at paragraph level. So you'll often see in stories on Wattpad that the people that are reading the story will go in and comment about a character that they like, or if they don't like what happened in the story, or giving the writer feedback. So it's really an engaging reading process, whereas historically you read a book and it's a very solitary experience, but now we're kind of bringing this community facet in where the reader and the writer can sort of converse while the reader is engaging in the story. And like I was saying, we're very focused on the community, so we like to make sure that both Wattpad as a company and the writers can have a consistent engaging process with the readers. So this is just a high-level overview of where our biggest markets are. So you can see North America is our largest market, but we also have a very large Asian market, and in South America as well, it makes up 11% of our users. And we have users across every age, every cultural background. It's really a very diverse community. And with that diverse community that Wattpad has, we're lucky to have the most diverse submissions library in the entire world. So we have content that's been written by probably every person in every country. Well, I shouldn't say every person, a person in every country. So that is really interesting to me because it gives different backgrounds, and it sheds a light on certain genres or cultural nuance that you wouldn't normally find in a traditional publishing house. And Wattpad is also an entertainment company in that we partner with entertainment companies all over the world. So these are just a few of the companies that we've partnered with in the past. There's a mix of publishing and entertainment because in the past we have had co-publishing where we'll work with a publisher to publish a book, and we'll also work with entertainment partners to adapt the Wattpad stories into movies or TV shows. And this is just one example of one of the stories that we adapted into a movie this past April. It was called After, and it was written by an author named Anna Todd, who was a military wife. Her husband was overseas fighting in a war, and she just started writing a Harry Styles fan fiction one day on her phone, and she ended up publishing it on Wattpad, and it was read over 1 billion times, which is unbelievable. And from there, Simon & Schuster published it, and it went on to sell over 11 million copies around the world. And then this year, we released the movie. We co-produced a movie with Avalon Pictures, and it was released globally. And in South America, it was released by Diamond Films. So with this movie, we've now grossed over 70 million internationally, and it's actually the #1 indie movie of the year. And I think this really shows the power of a community that a Harry Styles fanfic from Wattpad can go on to achieve this amazing success. And it's not about revenue either. It's also about making sure that, when you think about digital marketing and the digital community, we also want to make sure that that audience is also excited for the movie as well. So I just wanted to show very quickly that this is actually a screenshot from the social engagement score for the week after that the trailer was released for After. And you can see that in terms of the social engagement score, After was the #1 movie that people were most excited about. It actually beat Captain Marvel, which really surprised me. And if you take a look at the 33% number there on the far right, that actually means that the week before, when the trailer actually came out, the social engagement score was a lot higher. But unfortunately, I don't have a screenshot for that. But I think the 33% week-over-week number really speaks for itself and how big this trailer was for us. So when you have all this content and you have a community that loves reading it, what's the next step? So what we did in January of 2019 was we launched a book publisher. So it's a traditional publisher in every way that, we're gonna have print runs, we're not doing print on demand, we're gonna be sold in bookstores in Canada and the US. But the way that we find our content is a little bit different. So we do only publish stories from Wattpad, and that kind of gives us a lot of flexibility in the stories that we're publishing because we're able to use our story DNA machine learning technology to go in and really understand what stories are resonating with our community at a specific time. So this is really something that's never been seen in the industry before. It's really flipping the traditional publishing model on its head, where normally, maybe an agent has a slush pile and they go through that and they find something that sounds good and they go to a publisher, and then maybe that book gets published, and then it gets really hard to find an audience for the book, and it's very difficult. But the way Wattpad is doing it is a little different because we already have a built-in audience for all of our stories. So the stories that we're publishing have already been read sometimes millions of times. And we know that we have the capability to move the audience and the fans of that book on Wattpad off the platform to go and purchase these books in the bookstore. Because at the end of the day, the bottom line is, are people going to buy these books? Revenue is really an important factor when you're talking about publishing books. So this is pretty exciting because our first season of books will be released this fall. We have 6 titles. And in fact, our first title, which is coming out in August, just rolled off the press a couple weeks ago. So we're pretty excited about that. We also have a lot of boxes of books in our office right now, so that's not great, but we're excited. So I was talking a little bit about how we're finding the content and the stories that we're publishing, and we're using something called story DNA machine learning. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with machine learning, but it's essentially a way that computers use algorithms to find patterns in data, and then those computers make predictions based on those patterns. So when we talk about Wattpad's machine learning models, how we trained the computers was using a combination of Wattpad stories that are performing very well, that have, big authors that people are following. They're well written, their grammar, the vocabulary is considered high caliber. So we take those stories, and then we also take commercial bestsellers, and we feed that into a computer because that's what we call training data. So we're training the computer on this data using a process called natural learning process, which is essentially a fancy way of saying that a computer is reading a lot of text. So does this mean that robots are reading books? Kind of, yes, but also no. Because it's important to remember that when we're publishing these books, yes, a computer is reading the actual text, but there are editorial and content specialists involved that are human, and they're involved every step of the way, working with the author to make sure that there is a rigorous editing process that goes through before any of these books are published. So it really combines the best of art and science in that we're taking these machine learning tools and we're applying a traditional editorial approach to these stories. And I think it really combines into something pretty magnificent. So we're using machine learning to find the stories, but what else does it tell us? So for one, it's a quality indexer. So it tells us things like how great the grammar is in a story. If the sentence structure is considered high caliber, that's really important. How good is the vocabulary, things like that. So it really assesses the nuts and the bolts of the story so that we know that, yes, this is a market viable story that we can sell. It's also a comparables finder, so we can use this tool to find comparable titles to this story. So just as an example, if a publisher or a studio comes to us and says, we're seeing a lot of traction with werewolf books that are based in outer space, let's say, they can come to us and ask us, how many other werewolves in outer space books do you have? And we can give them a whole list. And then they can look at the content that way. It's also an emotions identifier, so it's assessing the emotions that are being evoked in a story. So does a story make you feel sad or happy or scared? These are all emotions that machine learning can tell us, and then it can deduce, I guess, the most prominent emotions that are coming through, which I think is important when you're classifying things like horror, because when you say horror, it's such a broad genre, and I think it's also very subjective. What scares me might not scare you. So I think it's really good to know to what degree are these emotions being evoked, because it helps you understand what you're getting into before you read the book. And it also assesses themes and topics discussed in the story. So it can look at things like the setting. So we can take a story and use this machine learning model, and then the output could tell us 23% of this story happens in a high school, 10% of this story happens in an arcade. So this is a really good way to quickly understand what kind of settings the story has, and that helps us on the editorial side when we're trying to, write back cover copy, let's say. So we can say, it's a high school drama, based on the machine learning model telling us that most of the story happens in a high school. So I want to take you through a very quick case study just to show you another way that this technology is very useful for us. So every year, Wattpad has an award that we give out. It's called the Waddies Award, and we invite all of our community to submit their best stories in the hopes of winning an award. So they can win an award for best fiction, best romance, best world building, things along those lines. So in 2018, we opened the call for submissions, and we got 150,000 submissions, which is just too much to read for human judges. So what we ended up doing was we used our machine learning model to understand what kind of stories were high caliber content, what kind of stories really should be winning this award. And we were able to reduce the number of stories from 150,000 down to 6,000, based on the output from the machine learning model telling us which of these 150,000 stories were considered high caliber. And then with those 6,000 stories that we ended up with, our human judges went in and were able to assess them all one by one. And I mean, 6,000 is a lot more manageable than 150,000. So when I'm talking about looking at data using machine learning, what kind of data are we actually looking at? It really falls into 3 buckets. So the first is reader activity. So that's looking at things like what stories, authors, and genres are becoming really popular and are trending on Wattpad. And sometimes we can even see what's trending and what's picking up traction even before the writing community sees it. So that's a really good thing to be able to get ahead of and be able to predict those trends, writing and reading trends, I should say, before the community can even see it. We're also looking at writer activity. So we can isolate genre trends and character tropes in stories written by a variety of demographics. So we can see what kind of characters are picking up steam, what kind of characters are not really, performing as well. One of the character tropes that really always performs well is the bad boy, but we would be the first to know when the bad boy trope stops being popular, but I'm happy to report it's still very popular. And then the last is story elements. So we analyze characteristics like story structure, writing style, story sentiment, and this helps us understand what stories are really resonating in our community. So this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, where we're trying to find that high caliber content in our community. We have a lot of stories, and it's great that people want to write and want to put their feelings out onto pages and get that out into the world. But at the end of the day, people, they want to read stories that are captivating, and I think that it's really helpful that we're able to assist in finding those stories. So Wattpad is a tech company, like I said, but we've kind of always been using data. It's just the type of data has really changed. So we've always been using things like social cue data. So when people add a story to their library, when people share a story with their friend, when people comment on a story, those are really great metrics to understand how engaged a reader is, but we've been using that since Wattpad started. We've also been using readership data, so fast growth, how fast are stories growing on the platform, time spent, how long are people spending reading those stories? Is it going up? Is it going down? Has it plateaued? And upward trend demographics, so looking at genre trends. How fast are werewolf stories trending upwards, or are they trending downwards? So this is stuff we've always been using. But now with Story DNA, we're now able to assess story quality and story sentiment. So it really just adds another level to Wattpad's understanding of the reading experience, which I think is really important in publishing, especially since we're going to be publishing books and we need to make sure that they're viable. So how does this help us find great books? So we know how to find stories that are high caliber using machine learning technology that I explained earlier. But we also had a few other boxes that we wanted to check before we decided the 6 books that would end up on our fall 2019 list. So we knew that we needed to find stories that had diverse voices, that were written by diverse authors. We wanted to find captivating stories, so we needed to know that the stories that we publish, they have a dedicated fan base that's willing to go to the bookstore and buy those books. A lot of the time with people on Wattpad, there's a sense of ownership that people have for these books, just because it started on Wattpad and then it gets published, and it's kind of that, it kind of makes you feel cool to be like, I read this book before it was in bookstores. It's kind of that, teenager kind of mentality where they feel like they need to be there from the ground floor. So that's sort of something that we're able to leverage, especially in marketing. We can say things like, this book started on Wattpad and you read it there first, and now you can buy it at a bookstore. And that kind of goes into the next point, a highly engaged reader community. We had to make sure that we had that built-in audience that we would be able to leverage when the book came out. And then last, we wanted to make sure that we were representing underrepresented genres. Right now in Canada and in North America as a whole, there's a lot of emphasis being put on own voices and publishing stories that are coming from people of diverse backgrounds and diverse genres. So we really wanted to make sure that we were adding diversity and variety into the book landscape in North America. And then on the right-hand side, you can see our fall 2019 list. So we have 6 titles. They're all kind of different genres. QB Bad Boy and Me is a romance that takes place in high school. That's about a type A cheerleader that meets a football star. Saving Everest is a story. It's a novel that deals with mental health when a very popular boy in high school tries to take his own life and then meets a very quiet girl, and they kind of fall in love. And it's a really beautiful story about blossoming romance with the backdrop of depression. Cupid's Match is a fantasy story of sorts about a girl who finds out through a matchmaking service that her soulmate is actually Cupid himself, which has very dangerous repercussions for the universe. What Happened That Night is a Gone Girl type of horror with lots of secrets and twists that come out about a murdered student and the neighbor who's arrested for the crime. I'm a Gay Wizard, which is my personal favorite. It's a fantasy for the LGBT generation, which is really important. It's a story about 2 LGBT teens that are whisked away to a magical school after performing a vengeance spell. And Trapeze is our last book. It's a fiction novel, and it's a really great story about a teenager who spent her whole life in the circus, but was forced to leave it due to a tragic accident and is being forced to live with a mom that she's never really knew before. So machine learning, I've talked a lot about it. That's what we use. But we often hear a lot of issues with machine learning, like it introduces confirmation bias, or just bias, I should say. And it's true that machine learning is really only as good as the data that it starts with. If you put bad data in, you're going to get bad data out. And a really good example of this is a story that I heard about how Amazon was using machine learning in its hiring technique, where they took all the resumes of people who were already employed by Amazon and were using that data as benchmarks for hiring new employees. And what they ended up finding was that the people that they were preferring in the new hiring process were all white men, because the people that were already working at Amazon were all white men. So it's just kind of interesting to see how machine learning really does depend on the type of data that you're training the machine on. So I just want to reiterate, Wattpad is using machine learning, but we're also taking very special care to make sure that the data that we're training our machines on is data coming from a very diverse group of people, and they're speaking from a variety of backgrounds. They're coming from a whole bunch of different cultures. So it's really safe to say that we have the most diverse data set in terms of stories on the planet. Because our data really does reflect our community. It's 70% female and includes minority and marginalized voices from all over the world. And that's something that you really don't see anywhere else. And just continuing with the diversity theme here, we see a lot of really interesting themes and trends on Wattpad that you don't see in traditional publishing. So, for example, Muslim love story is a really big theme right now. It's about Muslim romance, so romance featuring Muslim characters. And I think last year it was over 1.7 million minutes were spent reading Muslim romance. And this is actually an increase of 51% in reading time compared to 2017. We're also seeing an increase in people reading and writing LGBTQ stories. So last year, readers spent 32 million minutes reading stories dedicated to people who identify as transgender, agender, gender fluid, and non-binary. And there has also been a huge surge of people supporting characters and writers of color. So readers spent close to 116 million minutes last year reading stories tagged POC, diversity, diverse lit, and this is actually up 41% over 2017. And because we have such a huge female population in our platform, they love reading about strong women. So last year, they spent more than 107 million minutes reading stories tagged feminism, girl power, and feminist, and this is up 43% of 2017. So these are really interesting trends that are only growing. And I think as our demographic ages up, I think you're gonna see a lot more really high caliber content coming out of these writers that are really interested in these. And one really interesting trend that is particular to Spanish-speaking countries is something called goodbyes. And I guess it's a young adult romance genre. And it's about people who fall in love when they're 16 and then they break up, and it's the whole heartbreak kind of trope, except that they don't break up for any particular reason. It's a breakup because maybe somebody had to go off to college or somebody moved to a different school. It's very innocent, but this is a trend that we're really seeing a lot of growth in as well, particularly in Spanish-speaking countries. So I've talked a lot about why it's important to know what our users are reading and what they are reading. And it begs the question, why do we care so much about what people are reading? Why are we so invested in this? Well, at the end of the day, we're launching a book publisher, so we need to make sure that the people that are reading the stories are going to be willing to go out and buy the books. Because at the end of the day, a publisher needs to be able to sell books. And what we ended up doing was we ended up going straight to the community and asking our users, would you be willing to buy a book that you already read on Wattpad? Because one of the biggest criticisms that we heard about launching our book publisher was, why would somebody go to the bookstore and buy a book if they can read the exact same book on Wattpad for free? So we went to our users and we asked them, we asked about 2,000 Wattpadders in US and Canada about their book buying behaviors, and we're really happy to report that nearly half are willing to buy the book after they read the same book on Wattpad. So they like free books, but they also regularly purchase books. So in the past month, nearly 60% of Wattpad users had purchased one book, and nearly 1 in 5 had purchased 6 books or more. So these are book enthusiasts, they're book buyers. Just because they like to read books on Wattpad for free doesn't mean that they're not going out and purchasing books that they're interested in. And this is really good information for us to have because this is our market right here. And we also know that even though our audience skews a little bit younger, they have disposable income to spend on books as well. So we know that 65% of people that we surveyed actually bought the last book that they purchased with their own money. So they don't have to go to their parents for money to buy books. They have their own money and they're happy to spend it on books. And making the books available for free doesn't mean Wattpad users are not going to purchase them. And that was the other big takeaway for us. What we really learned about our community was they look at books as trophies or as collector's items. If somebody loves a book enough, all they want is to put that book on their bookshelf. And I think that fact combined with the ownership that our users feel about Wattpad stories, I think that's really a great recipe for book sales for this publisher, because combining that sense of ownership and the need to say, I read this book on Wattpad and now it's on my bookshelf, how cool is that? I think that's really the key takeaway for us. I think that's really important. So what I really wanted to try to convey here in front of you all is we have so much data on the reading experience, and I think that is really, really important. Because reading is really starting to move away from being a one-sided, a one-sided process, and it's really more of a transactional process now. So there are two sides to this. So I'm really excited that I got to come here and just sort of share some information with you about the other side of that reading experience process that we see. And that, at the end of the day, because of this great information that we have on the reading experience, we really can see things that other publishers can't see. Thank you.